The cessation of deaths and collapses at the Countess of Chester Hospital, once Lucy Letby was removed from clinical duty, has been a central pillar of the prosecution case against Lucy. We can see on the screen here Detective Superintendent Paul Hughes stating that they mentioned that a member of staff had been moved and that it coincided with no more collapses and no more deaths. We now know this to be completely untrue. Before I go into discussing why this is untrue, I firstly want to show you how important this has been, this assertion that we didn't have any more deaths and collapses once Lucy Letby stopped working as a nurse. I'll begin by looking at the Thirlwell inquiry from Tuesday the 3rd of December 2024. So we see this line of questioning. I believe this is Nicholas de la Pere. So far as you were aware from the meetings that you did attend, we know as a matter of fact the pattern did stop, that the sudden and unexpected collapses stopped, the deaths stopped. And then there's an answer from the person being interviewed. I can recall conversations that the unit had gone from a level 2 unit to a level 1 unit, but it had retained the staffing levels at a level 2 staffing. So I can remember conversations about the unit having good staffing levels to meet a level 1 unit, and at that stage I think there was weekly monitoring of performance to the executive directors. But that was one of the hypotheses that was being discussed in the meeting, that the unit being downgraded was a better place for it. So all of that answer there is entirely rational. Those are all reasonable reasons why you would expect the death rate to reduce. Even if the unit had continued as a level 2 unit, it's likely that the death rate would have reduced anyway from this elevated period. But it is significant that the unit was downgraded and the clinical work they were dealing with changed. However, the assertion has always been suddenly the results were incredible and there were no further suspicious collapses, no further deaths, etc., etc. So there's further discussion here. This is from the same day. So as you understand, that one change was made in July, yes. The other change was that the nurse who is the subject of this note, yes, was removed. You've described conversations where you tell me if I'm wrong about this. This is for you to comment upon that the conversations about the fact that the deaths had stopped were being discussed in the context of the downgrade of the unit. So this has always been an absolutely key pillar, a key assertion of the prosecution of Lucy Letby, and those who argue in favour of the prosecution of Lucy Letby. The death has stopped. The death stopped as soon as Lucy Letby came off the unit. We now know this to be untrue thanks to this Daily Telegraph article by Lucy de Oliveira that is headlined, Letby Police Ignored Other Baby Deaths on Unit. Parents' queries over babies' care dismissed because they were in hospital after nurse convicted of murders left, emails reveal. So I'll read from this article and then we'll reflect on the importance of this. Police investigating the baby unit where Lucy Letby worked brushed off deaths and potentially suspicious events that occurred after she had stopped working there, leaked emails have revealed. After Letby's arrest made national headlines in 2018, a number of parents contacted police with concerns about what their babies experienced on the neonatal unit of the Countess of Chester Hospital. Several described events that bore striking similarities to the cases Cheshire Constabulary was treating as suspicious, but which took place after Letby had stopped working on the unit as a neonatal nurse. These parents' accounts were dismissed, with an officer telling them that the investigation was only looking at events on the unit until July 2016, the month Letby was forced out of her job before being charged with murdering babies there. So the article continues. These parents' accounts were dismissed, with an officer telling them that the investigation was only looking at events on the unit until July 2016, the month Letby was forced out of her job before being discharged with murdering babies there. The newly uncovered emails are likely to lend weight to accusations that police fixated on Letby from the start at the expense of investigating all possible causes for babies' deaths and collapses, and that incidents were selected to match dates and times she was there. Mark MacDonald, Letby's defence barrister, said, one of the major concerns in relation to the police investigation is whether it pre-selected cases based on whether Lucy Letby was working. This was a self-fulfilling investigation. They identified a suspect and then they found the babies to match the suspect. A report by the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health noted sudden mottling as one of the similarities doctors had noticed in the cases they associated with Letby. After the nurse's arrest, one father wrote to police, concerned after he had read reports about the unexplained sudden mottling observed on some of the babies she was suspected of harming. The father noted that his son's doctors had also picked up on unexplained mottling of his skin, his entire body, but his son had been treated in the neonatal unit in September 2017, more than a year after Letby had stopped working there. In response to the father's email, a family liaison officer with Cheshire Constabulary reassured him, "It doesn't appear that our inquiry is linked to his son's time at the Countess because our inquiry end date is July 2016. I won't reflect on the poor standard of writing in that sentence. So this is obviously extremely serious. We're going to go through all the significance of this, but the first thing that I'll state before I go any further is that the police are telling these parents that we're not going to investigate what you believe could be a criminal act because it will scupper our investigation into what we believe to be this other criminal act. It can potentially destroy their investigation, and so they won't investigate. So you might think that would be the only instance, but there was another set of parents that contacted the investigation with concerns that their son's care was medically mismanaged, potentially as a deliberate act. The parents wanted to know whether the major life-threatening issues with their son's airway, which they had originally understood to be the result of medics mistakenly using the wrong diameter equipment, were in fact the result of deliberate actions and with malicious intent. So let's just pause there for a second. We're going to come back to this later in the video, but we know they've used the wrong diameter equipment on child K. That's going to be very significant later on. But this is just one of many medical errors that were made on the unit. The same family liaison officer told the parents that their son will not be included in our inquiry since he had been treated at the Countess after July 2016. I would like to assure you that we believe that this is our end date, the officer wrote. So they had no intention of including this infant in the inquiry because they decided we're just going to look at the period that Lucy Letby was working, and that, we'll get into this later, had been cited by paediatricians on the unit. So before we go any further, I want to talk about Lucy's grievance procedure. So you can see on the screen here the points from her grievance procedure being accepted by this very thorough process that was entirely independent, and all 7 points that Lucy raised as a grievance against the way she was treated on the neonatal unit, against the hospital, against the consultants in particular, all of those points were upheld. I should mention again contextually, it's very, very unusual, extremely unusual, it may even be unprecedented for a nurse to take out such a grievance against consultants, let alone for this grievance to be accepted on all 7 points. But anyone looking at the situation independently, in which she'd been very clearly bullied by consultants on the unit, they'd have to, and obviously they'd made unfounded, unevidenced accusations that she had harmed babies. Anyone assessing that obviously immediately had to say, well, yes, she has been mistreated, as she very obviously did. I'll talk about this more later. I want to look at the Cheshire Police response to Lucy's article first. So a spokesman for Cheshire Constabulary gave the usual witless statement. Operation Hummingbird reviewed approximately 4,000 neonatal admissions at Liverpool Women's Hospital and the County Chester Hospital from 2011 to 2016. This included periods before, during and after Lucy Letby's employment and all times she was on or off duty. So we know for a fact that's untrue, but we'll come back to that later. The investigation was not focused on Lucy Letby. Every case was assessed independently. The team also re-examined all neonatal deaths from 2011 to 2018, ensuring each was fully investigated regardless of Lucy Letby's employment status. Since 2018, all neonatal and maternity deaths at the County Chester Hospital have received full senior investigating officer oversight with formal reporting into Operation Hummingbird. Cheshire Police will not be responding any further. In response to the father's email, a family liaison officer with Cheshire Constabulary reassured him it doesn't appear that our inquiry is linked to his son's time at the Countess because our inquiry end date is, well, they wrote in July 2016. So contrast that with the police statement. So the police claim, we examined all neonatal deaths very carefully, whereas they actually told two separate parents, we're ending our investigation at July 2016, so we therefore won't look into the circumstances surrounding your child, because if we did, we might find out that there's information which contradicts everything we've done in the investigation to this point in time. Now, this is hugely important from a statistical perspective, because I've spoken to numerous statisticians. You've already heard from some of them on this channel. You hear from more in the future. There are more in my book. And they all say the shift chart that you can see on the screen now, which was used prominently in court, is not only worthless, but it's impossible to produce without working backwards and without being deliberately selective. Now, this latest information is just another item. We already knew this to be the case anyway, because the top people in the country had already said this was the case, but they've just proved it. Cheshire Police have just proved that everything the statisticians were saying is completely true. I want to emphasise as well, because it's often stated, this wasn't used very much in court. I know for a fact that's untrue, because I've spoken to people that were in court. However, we don't need to speak to people that are in court, because we have this record of the very first day of the prosecution case. So the prosecution begins at 12:49 p.m. At 12:51 p.m. they make some general comments about the city of Chester and the hospital. At 12:52 p.m. they say the following: the statistics of the mortality rate were comparable prior to January 2015, but there was a significant rise in the number of babies dying or having catastrophic collapses. This rise was noticed, and the concern was the babies had died unexpectedly, and when babies collapsed, they did not respond to sufficient resuscitation. The collapses defied the expectations of the treating doctors. Usually, when an intervention is taken, a positive response can be expected, he told the jury. Babies who had not been unstable at all or on the mend suddenly deteriorated for no reason at all. Consultants noted there was one common denominator, the presence of neonatal nurse Lucy Letby. And I believe after that, the chart was presented for the first time. So the very first argument of any substance that was made in court by the prosecution is this statistical argument. It's this argument about Lucy being the common denominator. It's the argument that is made visually by the shift chart. We already knew that shift chart was completely worthless, but now we know they cherry-picked the cases looking at only a certain period in order to make Lucy appear guilty. So we're going to look now at the process of narrowing the dates down for this investigation. So here we have the notes for a meeting between Cheshire Police and some executives from the Council of Chester Hospital that's held on the 5th of May 2017. So we have here Ian Harvey, the medical director, and DM is Darren Markland. Chambers to Chief Constable Simon Byrne on the 2nd of May 2017. Concerns have been raised regarding a higher than usual number of neonatal deaths from January 2015 to June 2016. And that of course, is the period that the police decided to look at the exclusion of everything else. Then we look at this is the Guardian article. This is from the 18th of May. This is 13 days after that meeting, just a matter of days after they decided to investigate when they previously thought they wouldn't investigate. And they make it clear Cheshire Police will look at deaths of 15 babies and 6 non-fatal incidents between 2015 and 2016. The hospital said it had contacted the police this month to help them rule out unnatural causes of death in its neonatal unit between June 2015 and June 2016. We will focus on the deaths of 8 babies that occurred between that period where medical practitioners have expressed concern. In addition, the investigation will also conduct a review of a further 7 baby deaths and 6 non-fatal collapses during the same period. And that was all they ever looked at. And then there's another document here in which it's stated that the scope of the investigation will be restricted to an 18-month time period. So then we have Sonia Bayliss from Cheshire Police writing here to Dr. Evans. This was in June just shortly before Dr. Evans made his first infamous appearance at Blackham Police Station to decide within 10 minutes that there was definitely malfeasance. And this is approximately 6 weeks after they decided to launch an investigation. And you see the representative Cheshire Police indicating that they will look at collapses between June 2015 and June 2016. Now, I'll get back to Dr. Evans' role in this later on, but you can see immediately that they're narrowing the dates down and they're showing him exactly what we're going to investigate. So it's not as if they're looking at a broad tranche of cases at this point. Dr. Evans always claims, I had no idea that a crime was committed, but we're going to be looking further at his role in Operation Hummingbird and what we know from these leaked documents in a video in the next week or so, possibly in the next 2 weeks. I'm not quite sure when it will come out, but it'll be relatively soon. But I think it's fair to say the idea that he didn't know a crime had been committed is completely untenable when you look at the documents, and they told him which period to look at. I'm going to come back to reflect on Dr. Evans' role a bit later on. So there's been a lot of previous comment, as we've discussed on this channel, from statisticians indicating their criticism of what the police did. Perhaps the most important is Professor Jane Hutton, just purely because the police wanted to employ her, and then the Crown Prosecution Service seemingly told them not to get Jane Hutton involved, and since then she has become a strident critic. You can go back and watch my interview with Professor Hutton on this channel, where she's very outspoken in her criticism of the police, in her criticism of the prosecution, in her criticism of the conviction and the evidence used to achieve this. And this news is important from a statistical perspective, because everything that I've been told by statisticians about the need to work backwards in order to produce the shift chart has now been vindicated by this new revelation. You've already heard on this channel numerous statisticians state that the shift chart is worthless. This calls the legitimacy of there being a spike in the first place even further into question. With regard to this, as half of the deaths that occurred at the County Chester during the indictment period aren't in the court case, the supposed spike has even less solidity. The prosecution case is entirely reliant on this shift chart and inferences that are made from it. So essentially, this should be devastating to the prosecution case if we had what you might describe as a healthy legal system, but now we have to fight like hell to get Lucy out of prison, whereas this should never have been in the original court case because it's fundamentally dishonest, it's fundamentally misleading, and from a scientific perspective, it's fundamentally worthless. And then from a police perspective, this is also significant because Cheshire Police clearly did not open-mindedly investigate the context of what occurred at the County Chester in a thorough fashion. Devastatingly and disgracefully, Cheshire Police refused to investigate what were potentially legitimate complaints of malfeasance, certainly from their perspective, because these complaints didn't fit into their narrative. This was yet another egregious error in what was, at best, a phenomenally flawed investigation. Paul Hughes of Cheshire Police has stated that they welcome challenge. Cheshire Police supposedly welcome being challenged, but when challenged on this, they released an insulting generic statement and then indicated that they won't comment any further. Indeed, I tweeted on this myself, and I said that I note the inevitable gutless, cookie-cutter, flagrantly inaccurate, asinine comment from Cheshire Police, where they say the team also re-examined all neonatal deaths, ensuring each was fully investigated regardless of Lucy Letby's employment status. And I've simply said, yes, well, look at your own internal email. You very obviously did not do that. Now, the next thing I want to look at is how the police selected cases. But before we do that, I want to reiterate what occurred on the 15th of May 2017. This was the date when paediatricians from the County Chester Hospital, Dr. Susie Holt was in attendance, but far more significant were the attendees Dr. Stephen Breary and Dr. Ravi Jayaram, both of whom spoke far more in this meeting than Dr. Susie Holt. I've made a standalone video on Dr. Susie Holt and her contribution, so you can take a look at that if you wish. But the important figures here are Paul Hughes and Nigel Wenham, who led the Cheshire Police investigation, if indeed we can really accurately describe it as an investigation. and Dr. Stephen Brewery and Dr. Ravi Jairam, who became incredibly important in this whole process. And I want to go through this meeting and just show the extent to which Lucy Letby was identified by the paediatricians during this meeting. So here, Ravi Jairam says early on, if you have concerns about a doctor, you would report to GMC. Concerns about a nurse to Nurse and Midwifery Council. If wider issue like this escalate through the trust, regarded as whistleblowing if you go outside. So I've said numerous times they're not whistleblowers. They're definitely not whistleblowers. That's undeniable. They're even saying here themselves that they're not whistleblowers. But they obviously are very specifically indicating here that they have concerns about a nurse. But there is much more to come. Stephen Brewery talks about, following on from that thematic review, we discussed the nurse but no action taken. I shared the report with IH prior to the CQC inspection. At this time, the nurse had been put on day shifts for mentoring reasons. So not only do they make it very clear that they suspected a nurse, but there's only one nurse from that hospital that's been put on day shifts for mentoring reasons, but they're going to identify her further still. Confirm how many that nurse had been present. The nurse was present in all but one of the deaths, so that's not true, but again, they're identifying the nurse in question once more. Then we have Rafi Jairam saying, at the point of the collapse, the nurse was present at the time in close proximity. This has not happened to other staff. So they're identifying Lucy again. And then there's another more specific thing, and they talk about the named nurse being present once again. And then it got to the point that when nurse was on duty, we feared something would happen. So they're identifying her again. That was Ravi Jairam speaking there. We are not on a witch hunt. We have concerns that this nurse was present in far too many occasions. So again, they're also not only identifying Lucy, but they're seeding the police with the idea that we need to look at how often she was on duty. And then Dr. Evans would do the same thing after they'd already told Dr. Evans, as we'll go on to discuss later on, that they suspected a nurse. And then there's another thing about staffing was included. This is Stephen Brewery now. Staffing was included in that report. Staffing on shift, designated nurse, consultant on duty, could not find link with consultants or doctors. I'm not going to critique all of these things. I just want to identify and show you, illustrate the extent to which they spoke about Lucy and they identified her. So then the Stephen Brewery here, this is a comment where they say, at that time, the unit manager noticed that Lucy Letby was present at all three. Now, I'm assuming this is a typing error and that it should be the nurse was stated and that Lucy Letby should go in brackets and they didn't actually name her. Although they might, by the time we get to the end of this, they might as well just have named her. I don't need, there's really no reason for them not to name her because they obviously identified her. But I've written in my book that it's possible they named her here. And it's possible they just said, we noticed that Lucy Letby was present at all three. That's the way it's written. But given that the police are, we've seen their standards of writing, we've seen their general standards, it's probably just a writing error. They probably didn't name her here. But it's possible that they did. But by the end of this discussion, they might as well just have named her anyway. And then we were very worried, the triplets, there was no explanation. She was named nurse. So again, all they need to find out was who the named nurse was, and they would know it was Lucy Letby. At a meeting in January, executive read out a letter from the nurse that states she was exonerated by reviews to date. So obviously they will know, they can easily find out. I mean, they did sod all investigation, but they will be able to find out and surely must have encountered the reality that that was Lucy. So they made it absolutely blindingly obvious that it was Lucy Letby, was the nurse that they suspected. They couldn't have made it any clearer. And then, of course, Lucy had taken out this grievance against the consultants, and it seems very likely that the consultants weren't very happy about this. It certainly seems likely that they were angered by this, and they ramped up efforts to refer this case to the police once Lucy won her grievance procedure. What she should have done was go for constructive dismissal. I'm not going to discuss that in this video. I've discussed it previously, but the hospital were advised that Lucy would have won a constructive dismissal claim, and I think it's undeniable that that's the case. It would have been almost impossible for the hospital to defend this. But the consultants had waged a 2-year campaign against Lucy, as we're going to discuss shortly. But firstly, I want to talk about consultants. identifying the period to be investigated to the police. So first of all, there's this message from Ravi Jairam to Nigel Wenham on the 10th of May 2017. And in this message, we see the following. The third document is data from the Regional Neonatal Network report looking at intensity, staffing and mortality in the period January 2015 to July 2016 in our unit and other units. The data comes from BadgerNet, which is the database used across the Cheshire and Mersey Neonatal Network. I'm sending these in my role as lead for the department, but this is a document that represents the collective view of us all. So I won't continue any further with the last sentence, but you can see Ravi Jairam here identifying the period that Cheshire Police would ultimately end up investigating. So they're not only being fed the suspect, they're being fed the period to look at by the accuser of Lucy Letby, who is Dr. Ravi Jairam. Dr. Stephen Breary was the ringleader. Dr. Jairam was very centrally involved as well. Then we move on to further correspondence from Dr. Ravi Jairam on the 4th of May 2017 to various representatives and various employees at the Council Chester Hospital. And in this email, which goes obviously 6 days before he sends the email to the police, he states, should we highlight explicitly for these cases that Lucy Letby was in attendance and in close proximity to the incubators in those situations we know for a fact she was? This is, after all, the basis of our concerns, and I think for the police to have their interest piqued, we need to have that with all the cases. So they're obviously trying to colour the perspective of the police before they even contact the police, and then that is precisely what they do when they speak with the police. Then there's another message here from Dr. Stephen Breary on the very same day, and this is sent out to the same largely consultants, same group of people from the Council Chester Hospital. And just the key thing here is I've mentioned Nurse L was present for all of them. And then 3 of these end up not being on the indictment, and 3 of them end up being on the indictment. So baby N, baby O, baby S never appear. Baby M, baby K, baby G do. PW, AS, KC, not an indictment. So their initials are there. So that was, again, Dr. Stephen Breary just trying to highlight, oh, look, no, Lucy's the common factor, Lucy's the common factor. And then it gets passed to the police, then it gets passed to Dr. Evans. Dr. Evans says, oh, why don't you look for a common... This is a comment that's made by Dr. Evans. If there's a nurse around for a lot of cases, then she's the suspect. This is after the police have told him there's a nurse suspect. It's just literally a circular process. It's quite incredible. And then, as this is Dr. Evans... which room was the baby in for the time the nurse was on shift? So I think I've highlighted this in the previous video already, he shouldn't be asking that question. It's nothing to do with him. His job is to dispassionately investigate the medical information that's been placed before him. The fact that he's asking which room was the baby in for the time the nurse was on shift, firstly, he doesn't need to ask that, which implies that he's just fiddling the information around so that it'll fit the narrative. And secondly, of course, it very strongly implies that he's been told that there's a nurse suspect, just as the paediatricians have told the police that there was a nurse suspect. So then, of course, on top of that, we have the lead of the investigation, Paul Hughes, telling the Observer that the information provided by Breary and his colleagues, who literally selected the cases for the investigation and identified the insulin cases, this information had been the golden thread for their inquiry, but it wasn't really inquiry. Everything was handed to the police by the consultants, and the police just dutifully did what they were told. It was in no way an inquiry. The parameters of the inquiry were defined by the accusers of Lucy Letby before it even began, and the police then simply followed no other lines of inquiry, including inquiring into the consultants themselves. They were just simply told, we suspect a nurse, these are the dates, go away and do those dates. And they said, yes, sir, we'll do that as quickly as we possibly can. So if we look back at this timeline that we've examined in more depth in previous videos, this was produced by my friend Catherine. I think this is so valuable even to look back at visually in this way without looking at all the details, because in red, you see all the problems on the unit. In yellow, you see the consultants saying, oh, there's commonality with Lucy, and suspecting Lucy and mounting their campaign against Lucy. And then I think the green really denotes there being a lack of evidence. So look at all the red, look at all the problems on the unit, and yet all the time in yellow, the consultants are saying it's Lucy, it's Lucy, it's Lucy. It's absolutely crazy. And then there's all this green that is saying, well, there's no actual evidence for any of the concerns. There's the evidence here, Lucy's grievance being upheld. There's still problems on the unit here, but the consultants won't budge. They're still saying it's Lucy. Clearly this is all being caused by Lucy. We keep seeing this nurse around. It's obviously her fault. An extraordinary situation has occurred in this hospital. This will be spoken about for centuries to come. I'm certain this will go into university courses across multiple subjects in examples of how not to do things. And then eventually we see the police investigation begins, as we've discussed in this video, and it's calamitous, really. Utterly calamitous. I don't know how else you could describe it. Disastrous. Horrifying. And just to mention as well that I covered that timeline in more depth in these 3 videos on the screen now. The truth about Dr. Breary and full timeline. The truth about the Lucy Letby Hospital and timeline. Lucy Letby full Cheshire Police timeline 2016 to present. Of course, we now know more information about the police and about what went on at this time. Finally, I just want to mention a tweet by Debbie Kennett. Debbie, in my opinion, has done some fantastic research and work on this case. I noticed her tweets from very early on, and she's always had a very good handle on everything related to this case. In this tweet, she notes that the parents of baby K were contacted in May 2017 and told that there was an investigation into a nurse at the County Chester, and they were looking into baby K because she fell within the time frame. And indeed, we can see this comment here. We didn't know anything about Lucy Letby or issues with child case treatment until my wife received a phone call from the police in May 2017, and then later on they were looking into all deaths within a time frame, so child K fell into this. It should be noted that this is the case in which there is a ridiculous... obviously, I mean, this failed in the first trial because there was no evidence. After Dr. J-Ram had written this email that's been highlighted in this video that we need to pique the interest of the police, he suddenly remembered that he'd seen Lucy Letby attempt to murder a baby, having not mentioned it for 14 months previously. And so he mentioned this comment that we now know to be inaccurate because we know his account in court wasn't true, because there's this email that completely contradicts that he wrote at the time. And so Lucy Letby, after the retrial of this infant, is now facing a life sentence, even though there's no evidence whatsoever. And child K wasn't even flagged as suspicious by Dr. Evans. And this infant died 3 days after Lucy Letby had any contact with the child in another hospital 20 miles away. So the fact that it's in the court case is farcical, and it says everything that they just decided to look at it because it was in the time frame. So I've got a few statements here from experts that I've managed to collate in order to be included in this video. So I'll begin with Stephanie Davies, who has appeared in a recent video on this channel. She's Senior Coroner's Officer for Chester and Cheshire, and was involved in the police investigation of Operation Hummingbird. This news sadly does not surprise me in the slightest. It has been apparent for some time now that Cheshire Police adopted an early erroneous narrative, and they have refused to deviate from that set narrative due to their tunnel vision and confirmation bias. The way Operation Hummingbird has been conducted into those tragic deaths and collapses at the County Chester Hospital is a stark reminder for all police forces on how not to conduct an investigation into a series of deaths. There now needs to be an intervention where all complex cases are taken away from Cheshire Police, and for this police force to be put into special measures. Also got a statement from Dr. Steve Watts, who featured in the same video with Stephanie recently, very experienced and qualified police investigator. This is an important development that provides additional evidence in 2 areas. Firstly, Operation Hummingbird was not an investigation into questioned deaths at the County Chester Hospital, but was entirely focused upon prosecuting Lucy Letby. July 2016 was the cut-off point for baby deaths and injuries that could possibly have been caused by Lucy Letby. An investigation focused solely on Lucy Letby would not be interested in deaths or injuries after that date, so I am therefore not surprised that families contacting police regarding their children after that date were turned away by Cheshire Police. Secondly, it provides evidence that deaths and injuries of a nature similar to those with which Lucy was charged continued long after she left the ward. This again brings into question the assertion by the police and the prosecution that Lucy Letby was present at all questioned deaths and injuries on the neonatal ward at the Countess of Chester. Finally, the press statement issued by Cheshire Police in response to this story misses the point. They assert that they have reviewed all questioned cases, including those from 2011 to 2018. It is evident that those reviews were conducted after the convictions of Lucy Letby. They led to the additional charges being sent to the Crown Prosecution Service, which were recently declined. At the time the parents contacted the police in 2018, they were not reviewing any cases outside the periods when Lucy Letby was on the ward. The final sentence of the Cheshire Police comment, indicating that they will not be responding any further, again indicates an astonishing level of petulance and arrogance for an accountable public body. This and their unprofessional response regarding the recent CPS decision not to prefer additional charges perhaps indicates the pressure that they are under. This does not excuse such arrogant and unprofessional behaviour on their part. And then finally from Professor Richard Gill, the statistician who has been involved in the exoneration of 2 other nurses previously who were wrongfully convicted. The police's rigid adherence to January 2015, when Lucy fully qualified, to June 2016 is certainly a very obvious part of their tunnel vision. They do have motivation. The spike in deaths seemed to start in 2015 with the 3 deaths and a collapse in June 2015, and the unit was downgraded and Letby removed in June/July 2016. I would have recommended they extended their time frame by adding the previous year 2014 and also the remainder of 2016. They should have investigated whether the case mix had changed, increased acuity from what it had been before. We know it changed at the end. A major defect of the RCPCH investigation is that it did not investigate possible causes of the spike. The RCPCH team did not, I believe, include a statistician or epidemiologist. They too were already focused on the short period covering the spike and did not ask where it came from. Everyone asked the medical question, why did those babies die? Nobody asked the question, why did so many die and why were they at the hospital in the first place? In summary, it has long since been suspected and asserted by statisticians that it would be impossible to produce the shift chart used in the conviction of Lucy Letby by any method other than working backwards from a preordained presumptive view. We now know that this is precisely what Cheshire Police did. There is absolutely no doubt that not only did Cheshire Police specifically examine a period that runs parallel with Lucy Letby working on the unit, they also excluded legitimate areas of investigation that did not fit into this pattern. It is quite possible, likely even, that Cheshire Police were too stupid to understand this. It is equally crystal clear that the investigation of Cheshire Police was precipitated by Dr. Stephen Breary and Dr. Ravi Jairam. We know that these 2 gentlemen were the accusers of Lucy Letby, and we also know that they ran a 2-year campaign against her at the Countess of Chester Hospital. When Dr. Stephen Breary and Dr. Ravi Jairam appeared at Blacon Police Station in Chester on the 15th of May 2017, they absolutely identified Lucy Letby during the meeting, making the suspicions clear to the point of being explicitly obvious. It is not really even clear why they didn't just name Lucy Letby, as it would be impossible to come out of that meeting with any other impression than that they suspected Lucy Letby. It is equally diaphanously clear that Cheshire Police ignored almost every conceivable line of inquiry, including several that should have been mandatory, and set out to prove the hypothesis that Lucy Letby was responsible for everything that had occurred at the Countess of Chester. We now know definitively that Cheshire Police allowed the information provided by Dr. Stephen Breary and Dr. Ravi Jairam to underpin and guide their entire investigation. The parameters of what Cheshire Police examined were defined by those who had been the accusers of Lucy Letby. This would be extraordinary enough in itself, but Cheshire Police then, having clearly examined no other lines of inquiry, actively involved Dr. Breary and Dr. Jairam in the selection of cases. There is also strong evidence that Dr. Dewi Evans was informed of suspicions regarding a nurse before beginning his so-called work on the Operation Hummingbird investigation. In addition, it should be reiterated that Cheshire Police explicitly excluded legitimate concerns from parents because they did not fit into their narrative. Effectively, what Cheshire Police are saying to these parents is, we won't investigate this potential crime because it could potentially scupper another investigation we're doing into what we consider to be a more important crime. Overall, the conduct and behaviour of Cheshire Police during this investigation can only be reasonably described as calamitously incompetent. I will be discussing this issue in more depth, the background of the hospital, the police investigation and other issues in my forthcoming book, Reasonable Doubt, examining the case of Lucy Letby, which will be published in July 2026. I will be updating on progress and some other issues related to this book on this channel in the foreseeable future. I also wanted to mention that there has been a significant spike, more than spike, talking on the subject of spikes again, in interest in this channel since the Netflix documentary was released. This is the number of watch hours per day that I've received since the channel began, and over the last few days I've had more than double, or approximately double, anything that I've ever received previously, as you can see on the right hand side of this graph. So that's excellent news, obviously, but also it gives me a foundation to take the book that I've written onto the international stage, because we want to make this international. So I'll certainly be looking to do work in some of the, and if not travelling to those countries, though in some cases hopefully travelling to them as well, but certainly making the book very much available and very much prominent in the English-speaking countries that are not England, so United States, Canada, Australia. I have a lot of following in Australia in particular, but also in Canada and the United States, and also Europe, but I guess with a particular focus on the English-speaking countries. The aim is to make this international, and that's what I'll be trying to do. Finally, I really appreciate everyone that subscribed recently to the channel. At the time that I'm recording this video, I have 4,927 subscribers. By the time this goes out, I may have broken through the 5,000 barrier. It's very much appreciated. If you do enjoy, or if you've enjoyed this video and other videos, if you could subscribe to the channel, it's very helpful to me. The most helpful things are always comments and watching the videos, but subscribers do help, and it helps you keep up to date with new content. We'll be recording many more videos in the weeks, months and years to come. And as I say, we'll be updating about my book as well in the next few weeks and months, heading towards the release date of July. With that being said, thank you for all the support. And if you have any queries or questions or comments about this video, please do leave them in the comment section and I'll try to respond to as many as I can.